I found out my 2-year-old son wasn't mine in a hospital stairwell on a Tuesday. The worst part? That wasn't even the worst part. Let me tell you who I was before that stairwell. Before the fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my own world cracking clean in half. My name is Ethan Clark, 41 years old, civil engineer. I design load-bearing structures for a living, bridges, foundations, the kind of infrastructure people drive over every day without thinking twice. I understand the math of permanence. I understand what it takes to build something that lasts. I applied that same precision to my marriage. 14 years to Sophia. 14 years of 60-hour work weeks of coaching Connor's soccer team in the rain, of sitting through Isabella's piano recitals in folding chairs with bad backs, of 2 a.m. feedings with Zachary when Sophia said she was too exhausted to move. I wasn't building a career. I wasn't building a house. I was building a legacy, a family, proof that a man could construct something permanent out of love and intention and sheer, stubborn effort. Connor was 13, smart kid, sarcastic in that way that made me secretly proud even when it drove me crazy. Isabella was 10, perceptive beyond her years, always watching, always processing. And Zachary was 2, just hitting his stride with full sentences, calling everything mine with absolute authority, including me, especially me. Dada, that's what he called me, every single morning. I was at the hospital because Zachary had been in a car accident. A minor one. Sophia had clipped a curb taking a turn too fast, and Zachary had hit his head on the window. The doctors said he was fine, precautionary monitoring, nothing to panic about. But when they asked about blood type for a possible transfusion, I stepped up without hesitation. "O negative," I told the nurse. "Universal donor, whatever you need." I said it with quiet pride. The kind of pride a man feels when he can give his child something life-saving with nothing more than his own biology. Dr. Patricia Hayes pulled me aside 15 minutes later. She had the careful face of someone trained to deliver bad news, composed, measured like she was diffusing something. She explained gently, methodically. She talked about blood type inheritance, about how certain combinations were biologically impossible. She used words like inconsistency and incompatibility. My engineer's brain chewed through the data before she finished the sentence. Ethan Clark, O negative. Sophia Clark, A positive. Zachary Clark, AB positive. The equation didn't balance. It couldn't balance. The numbers were telling me something that my heart wasn't ready to receive. I thanked Dr. Hayes. I walked back toward the waiting room, and then I stopped outside the door and looked through the small rectangular window at my wife. Sophia was sitting in a plastic chair, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. The same face I'd kissed good morning for 14 years. The same hands that had held mine in the delivery room 3 times. She looked up once, checked the clock on the wall, went back to her screen. The casual detachment of someone checking real estate listings. I pushed through the door and asked her to step outside. Something in my voice, or maybe something in my face, made her comply without argument. We walked to the stairwell. The door closed behind us. The sound of the hospital disappeared, replaced by the hum of the building's ventilation and the distant echo of our footsteps. I delivered it clinically, like a structural report, like reading findings from a site inspection. "They say Zachary isn't mine," I said. I watched her face. I've spent 14 years reading that face. I know the way it moves when she's tired, when she's annoyed, when she's genuinely happy, when she's performing happiness. I watched it now. Her composure, that real estate agent poker face she'd spent years perfecting, came apart. Not into shock, not into confusion, into something far worse. She looked caught. The confession came out in fragments, pieces falling from a height, landing in wrong order. Ryan Carter, their personal trainer, the one with the facility on South Lamar. An affair that happened 2 years ago, lasted 6 months. She was lonely, she explained. I was always working. She needed someone who was present. It meant nothing. It was over. It had been over for almost 3 years. My jaw tightened. My hands stayed loose at my sides. My voice stayed even. "Does Ryan know?" I asked. "No," she replied. She'd never told him. She wasn't sure who the father was. She'd hoped. She actually used that word, hoped, that it was mine. The dark absurdity of it hit me like a physical force. She had hoped biology would cooperate with her deception. Like hoping a cracked foundation would seal itself if you didn't look at it. Like hoping the load-bearing wall you removed wasn't actually load-bearing. "Ethan, please. Say something," she began. I said something. "Connor and Isabella, are they mine?" I asked. The stairwell went silent. Sophia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Answer the question, Sophia," I said. "Ethan, I don't think," she started. "Answer the fucking question, Sophia," I cut her off. The words bounced off the concrete walls. She flinched. Then she looked at the floor. Then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something caught between guilt and terror. I don't know," she whispered. Three words that detonated 14 years. I stared at this stranger wearing my wife's face. The woman I had chosen. The woman I had built everything around. And I felt the ground beneath me, that foundation I'd spent a decade and a half constructing, give way entirely. I didn't yell, I didn't hit the wall, I didn't cry. I walked back through the stairwell door and sat down beside Zachary's hospital bed and held his small hand and listened to the monitors and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot running calculations. 13 years with Connor, 10 with Isabella, 2 with Zachary. How many of those years were built on lies? I needed to know, and I needed her not to know I was looking. An engineer doesn't panic when a structure fails. He documents. He investigates. He determines the full scope of the damage before he decides what to do with the rubble. That's what I told myself in the days that followed. It kept me functional. I was living in two realities simultaneously. In the first one, I made breakfast. I drove carpool. I kissed children goodnight and asked about homework and attended soccer practice and made polite conversation over dinner. I was present. I was reliable. I was Ethan Clark, same as always. In the second reality, I was quietly, methodically dismantling my marriage with the detached precision of a forensic accountant. I moved into the guest room the night we came home from the hospital. I told the kids I had a deadline and needed to sleep without distractions. Connor gave me a skeptical look that told me he wasn't entirely convinced. Isabella said nothing and watched everything. Zachary asked if I'd read him a story. Yes, I answered, and I did every word while my hands held the book steady and my mind ran calculations I didn't want to finish. Sophia occupied our bedroom and cried. Not quietly, the theatrical kind of crying audible through walls, punctuated by soft knocks on my door that I didn't answer. She tried to talk to me in the mornings. She texted apologies throughout the day, paragraphs of them. She found a marriage counselor's website and sent me the link with a message that said, "I want to fix this." I read every message. I replied to none of them. I was too busy. I contacted 3 DNA testing companies, researching methodologies and turnaround times, identifying which provided court-admissible results with proper chain-of-custody documentation. I found a pediatrician who would run blood panels under the guise of routine checkups. I scheduled appointments for all 3 children on separate days so as not to raise suspicion. I collected the samples. I labeled everything. I mailed the envelopes on a Wednesday morning, standing at the post office counter with a calm expression and a racing heart. The double consciousness was its own particular horror. I sat beside Connor one evening helping him work through algebra problems, quadratic equations, the irony of which was not lost on me. And I looked at his face while he frowned at the worksheet, and I tried to find Sophia in him or myself in him, and came up with an unsettling ambiguity that made me want to put my fist through the wall. I watched Isabella at the piano, her fingers moving through a Chopin nocturne she'd been practicing for 2 months. I thought, what if she's the only honest thing in this house? The thought made me love her more fiercely and grieve more silently at the same time. And I held Zachary through a nightmare at 3 a.m., his small body pressed against my chest, his breathing slowing as I rubbed circles on his back. I knew what I knew. I held him anyway. I was still his father at 3 a.m. I would figure out what that meant in the daylight. Sophia found the testing appointments in my calendar on a Thursday. She cornered me in the kitchen before the kids woke up, her voice pitched low and frantic. "You're testing all of them, even Isabella, how could you?" she demanded. How could I interrupted, setting down my coffee mug. I turned to look at her. How could I? That's rich, Sophia. That is genuinely, spectacularly hilarious. I made a mistake, she started. A mistake is forgetting to pay the water bill. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. What you did, I stopped, breathed, recalculated. What would you call it? What word do you actually use for it when you're thinking about it? She opened her mouth, closed it, reached for the familiar architecture of self-defense. The loneliness, the emotional unavailability, the distance that had opened up between us after Isabella was born, her need to feel seen. So Ryan Carter's gym schedule was very emotionally fulfilling, I'm sure, I said. Very present of him. She started crying. I picked up my coffee and walked out. The DNA results arrived in my email on a Thursday morning. I was parked outside my office in my truck, engine off, the Austin heat already building against the windows. I opened the reports on my phone. The clinical language of the documents contrasted with the utter devastation of their content in a way that felt almost obscene. Connor Clark, age 13, probability of paternity, 0%. Isabella Clark, age 10, probability of paternity, 99.99%. Zachary Clark, age 2, probability of paternity, 0%. I read them 3 times. My engineer's brain, trained to recheck structural calculations, read them a 4th time. The numbers didn't change. 2 out of 3. 13 years of coaching Connor's soccer team, teaching him to ride a bike in the church parking lot on a Sunday morning, running alongside him with my hand on the seat until I wasn't anymore, watching him go. Sitting up all night when he had pneumonia at 7, monitoring his temperature every 40 minutes, terrified and trying not to show it. Campfires and bad movies and father-son talks I'd carefully prepared and then fumbled through. 13 years. 0%. I sat in my truck for a long time. The AC wasn't running. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck. I stared at the reports until they blurred at the edges. Then I put my phone in my jacket pocket, straightened my tie, and walked into my office building. That evening I returned home and set my briefcase beside the door and sat down at the dinner table. Sophia asked how my day was. Connor complained about his math teacher. Isabella showed me a drawing of a horse she'd been working on. Zachary threw peas at the wall and laughed at himself. Normals. Except I knew exactly what I was carrying, and I wasn't done finding out how deep it went. That night, I put the DNA reports in my briefcase and sat down to dinner with my family. The briefcase sat beside the door like a loaded weapon. Sophia asked how my day was. Fine, I answered, and I waited the way engineers wait, patiently, precisely, knowing exactly when the structure was going to come down. I chose the dining room table deliberately. There's something about that table. 14 years of dinners. Thanksgiving arguments and birthday cakes and homework spread across the surface and Sunday breakfasts that ran into Sunday lunches. That table was the center of gravity of this family. I wanted the dismantling to happen there. I waited until the children were at school. I poured 2 cups of coffee I didn't intend to drink. I placed the DNA reports on the wood between the 2 cups and sat down and waited for Sophia to come downstairs. She appeared in the doorway in her robe, still soft from sleep, and something in the arrangement of the room made her stop. She looked at the papers. She looked at me. She sat down. She read in silence. I watched her face move through stages, reading, comprehension, the moment the numbers landed. Something broke open behind her eyes, but I had learned in 14 years to read the difference between her genuine reactions and her performances. This wasn't guilt breaking through. This was fear. The specific fear of someone who has been running from consequences for a very long time and has just heard them arrive at the door. I gave her a moment. Then I asked, with the flat calm of a man conducting a structural inspection, "Who's Connor's father?" Her hands were shaking. She set the papers down. She pressed her palms flat on the table and looked somewhere past my shoulder and began. Mark Allen, she explained, 40 years old, her former boss at the real estate firm before she went independent. They'd met at a conference in Houston. She was precise about the city, which told me she'd thought about this moment more than once. A brief affair, before Connor's conception. When it ended, she didn't know she was pregnant. She told herself it must be mine. She convinced herself, because the alternative required a courage she apparently didn't possess. I stared at her. A conference baby, I said. The words tasted like ash. Jesus Christ, Sophia, you're like a walking cliché. She flinched. Good. I wasn't done. Does Mark know? I asked. No, she replied. Mark was married. It was only a few times. It meant nothing. He'd moved firms. She hadn't spoken to him in years. I picked up my coffee, set it down without drinking it. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. Were there others? I asked. She looked up at me. Sophia, were there others? Ethan, please, she began. Any, I pressed. She looked back at the table. Her jaw worked. Her hands pressed harder against the wood. How many, Sophia? 3, she burst out. The word cracked out of her. 3 others, but they didn't mean anything, Ethan, they were just. 5, I said quietly. 5 affairs, over 14 years of marriage. She was crying now, fully, completely crying. Mascara she'd put on before coming downstairs tracked in thin lines down her face. She was reaching for words, counseling and healing, and the children need us both, and doesn't everything we've built mean anything to you? I let her talk. I listened to every word. When she ran out of them, I said, I want you to understand something. She looked at me, eyes red, hands still flat on the table. I'm going to take everything from you, I said. Not because I'm cruel, because you've earned it. I didn't touch the coffee. I walked upstairs to the home office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I had research to do. Sharon Blackwood had a reputation that had preceded itself to me through 2 separate colleagues whose divorces she had handled with what they described, with a kind of shell-shocked respect, as total annihilation. Family law attorney, Austin-based, known in legal circles for leaving opposing counsel in smoking craters and walking out of courtrooms with judgments that made her clients weep with relief and her opponents weep with something else entirely. Her retainer was $50,000. I paid it the same afternoon without blinking. The consultation was held in her downtown office on a Tuesday. Sharon Blackwood was in her mid-50s, sharp-featured, with reading glasses she wore on a chain, and a way of listening that made you feel like she was already preparing your case while you were still mid-sentence. I laid out everything, the DNA results, the timeline, the affairs, the financials. She made notes, she asked precise questions. She didn't react emotionally to any of it, which I found deeply reassuring. Here's what we have, she said when I finished. Court-admissible DNA evidence establishing paternity fraud for 2 children. We're looking at 13 years for Connor, 2 for Zachary. 15 combined years of documented emotional and financial support provided under false pretenses. We can calculate and present a figure for documented child-rearing expenses, medical, educational, general care. I'm estimating around $247,000 in restitution claims. What about custody? I asked. Sharon looked at me over her glasses. Most men in your position don't pursue custody of children who aren't biologically theirs. I know, I said. Judges will find it notable, she observed. Good, let them, I replied. I thought about Connor asking me 3 days prior why I seemed sad. I thought about Zachary's arms reaching up, the uncomplicated certainty of the gesture, Dada. I thought about Isabella at the piano, the one honest thing in the house. These children had not lied to me. These children were innocent of everything. They didn't do this, I said. I'm not going to make them pay for it. Sharon nodded slowly. All right, then here's what we build. Sophia began researching marriage counselors. She sent me links, followed by hopeful texts, followed by dinners I used to love, the chicken piccata, the pasta she made from scratch on weekends. She cried prettily in the evenings. She was playing what she believed was a long game. She didn't know about Sharon Blackwood. She didn't know about the forensic accountant I'd retained to go through our joint accounts back to the beginning. She didn't know about the certified copies of the DNA reports secured in 3 separate locations. She didn't know about the Texas family law precedents I'd spent 3 weeks reading before I slept each night. And she didn't know that in 19 days, a process server would ring the doorbell while she was making coffee and hand her a document that would detonate her carefully maintained life. The foundation was already rigged. She just couldn't hear the countdown. The process server came on a Thursday morning. I know because I was parked 2 blocks away, watching the timestamp on my phone. Not out of cruelty, out of the same instinct that makes an engineer remain on site during a controlled demolition. You need to see it begin. You need to confirm the charges fire in the right sequence. Sophia's attorney was a man named Richard Barnes. Mid-tier firm, competent enough, operating on the reasonable assumption that this was a conventional if painful divorce case involving infidelity and shared custody of 3 children. He built a defense around a narrative that had the advantage of being simple and the disadvantage of being easily destroyed. Sophia Miller was a devoted mother who had made devastating mistakes in a marriage where she had felt chronically unseen and emotionally abandoned. As not a monster. She was a human being who had failed, and she deserved the opportunity to repair her relationship with her children. It was a reasonable strategy for a different case. Judge Judith Ramirez presided. She was in her late 50s. The courtroom gossip, relayed to me by Sharon with the clinical detachment of someone reporting weather data, was that Judge Ramirez had a particular and well-documented intolerance for wasted time and embellished testimony. Sophia took the stand with the composure of someone who had rehearsed extensively. She was dressed conservatively, navy blue, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. She spoke carefully. She described feeling emotionally abandoned after Isabella's birth. She described a marriage in which her husband was physically present but emotionally elsewhere. She described her affairs with evident shame, framing them as the desperate acts of a lonely woman rather than the calculated choices of someone who had operated a sustained deception across 14 years. She was good, I'll give her that. She'd always been good at rooms. Then Sharon Blackwood rose from the table. The cross-examination was quiet. That was the part Sophia hadn't prepared for, I think. She'd prepared for anger, for confrontation, for the dramatic Perry Mason moment. What she got was something colder. Mrs. Miller, you testified that you felt emotionally neglected after your daughter Isabella was born. Is that correct? Sharon asked. Yes, Sophia answered. And you described this neglect as the context in which you first sought comfort outside the marriage, Sharon continued. Yes, she replied. Isabella Clark was born in June of 2013. Is that correct? Sharon asked. A pause. Yes, Sophia confirmed. Mrs. Miller, the DNA evidence entered into this record, which you have acknowledged under oath is accurate, establishes that your son Connor was conceived in October of 2010, Sharon stated. She let the arithmetic sit in the air for a moment. That is 3 years before Isabella's birth, 3 years before the emotional neglect you have described to this court as the origin of your infidelity. Would you like to revise any part of your testimony? The color drained from Sophia's face as visibly as water from a glass. The court reporter's keys were the only sound in the room. Sharon proceeded methodically. She established the full timeline. She walked the court through each DNA result with clinical precision. She introduced the documented affairs, 5 of them, spanning the length of the marriage, beginning before Connor's conception. She presented the financial analysis. $247,000 in documented child-rearing costs for children Sophia had allowed Ethan to support under false pretenses. When Richard Barnes rose to argue that Ethan's pursuit of full custody was punitive rather than child-centered, Judge Ramirez raised one hand. Counsel, she said, her voice flat and final. Your client perpetrated a sustained fraud spanning more than a decade. She allowed Mr. Clark to provide emotional and financial support for children she had reason to believe were not biologically his, while engaging in multiple extramarital affairs, including one that produced a child she concealed the paternity of for 2 years. The children's best interests are the court's first and only concern. Those interests are served by stability, structure, and honesty. Mr. Clark has demonstrated all 3. Motion denied. The ruling came 3 days later. I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that actually went cold before I finished. Full primary custody of all 3 children awarded to Ethan Clark. Supervised visitation for Sophia every other weekend, pending documented evidence of rehabilitation, conducted in the presence of a social worker. $180,000 in restitution for a portion of the documented child-rearing expenses. The marital home awarded to Ethan as primary custodial residence. Assets divided heavily in Ethan's favor. Judge Ramirez's written statement included one line that Sharon texted to me separately, without comment. Mrs. Miller's pattern of deception raises serious and substantive concerns about her judgment, her character, and her fitness as a primary custodial figure. Until she can demonstrate sustained rehabilitation, this court finds that the best interests of the minor children are best served in the primary custody of Mr. Clark. The ripple effects were their own particular kind of justice, not the kind I engineered, but the kind that assembles itself once a lie collapses in public. Sophia's attorney, in a desperate attempt to shift custody obligations and financial liability, had contacted both Mark Allen and Ryan Carter. Mark Allen's wife, who had apparently not known, filed for divorce within the week. Mark Allen's attorney sent a terse letter declining any paternity acknowledgement and threatening counter-litigate. Ryan Carter changed his number and relocated to Colorado. The trial had become local news. Austin's upscale real estate community, in which Sophia had built a decade of professional reputation, of listings and commissions and carefully curated client relationships, consumed the story with the particular appetite of people who had attended our dinner parties and smiled across tables at both of us. Her business partner bought her out quietly, below market value with the leverage of obvious circumstance. Client contracts dissolved, referrals stopped. Sophia's parents, devout Catholics from San Antonio, who had attended our wedding and baptized all 3 children and sent Christmas cards with Bible verses, released a statement through their parish newsletter that reached me via a forwarded email from my mother-in-law's sister, who had always liked me. We are heartbroken by the choices our daughter has made and the pain she has caused to Ethan and our grandchildren. We stand with Ethan during this time and ask for privacy as we grieve. Her sister, who had been maid of honor at our wedding, who had given a toast that made the whole room cry, stopped returning Sophia's calls. Sophia tried to manage the narrative through Instagram. A carefully worded post about the complexity of marriage, about 2 sides to every story, about growth and accountability. The comments section became something I will not describe in detail, except to say that she deleted all of her social media accounts within 24 hours. I drove past the apartment she'd moved into on a Saturday afternoon. It was in a part of Austin she would never have chosen in the life she'd built. Smaller, further from the center of things, a complex with a parking lot that flooded when it rained. I watched her carry boxes from a rental truck to the building's entrance, alone in the October heat. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I felt like a civil engineer surveying a condemned building after the demo crew has finished. Relief that the dangerous structure was gone, and a clear-eyed awareness of how much work the building of something real and honest was going to require. The difference was this time I'd be building on solid ground. I didn't stay long. I drove home to my children. Connor was in the driveway, practicing free kicks against the garage door. Isabella was inside, I assumed, doing the complicated internal processing that 10-year-old girls do that looks like nothing from the outside and is everything on the inside. Zachary was at the kitchen table with his grandmother, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious negotiation over the number of crackers that constituted a reasonable snack. This was my life now. I pulled into the driveway and got out of the truck, and Connor looked up and asked if I was okay. "Yeah," I answered, and he nodded and went back to his free kicks, and I stood there for a moment in the October air and thought, we're going to be okay. Not a victory lap, not a triumph, just a man and his children and the slow, unglamorous work of building something true. The kitchen smells like coffee and bacon on a Saturday morning, which is how I know things are okay. It's a small metric, but I've learned to trust small metrics. Connor is 16 now. He's taller than me, happened somewhere in the last year without adequate warning, and he has a way of standing in doorways that makes the house feel smaller in a good way. He has his biological father's jaw, which I noticed about 8 months ago without saying anything. It doesn't change anything. It didn't then, it doesn't now. He's Connor. He's mine in every way that a person can belong to another person without biology requiring it. He asked to borrow my truck last week to take a girl to a movie. He leaned against the door frame with the practiced casualness of a teenager asking for something he's not entirely sure he'll get, and then he grinned. "Her name's Sarah Miller," he said, "and before you ask, no relation to Mom, already checked." The fact that he could say it like that, with a dark grin instead of a wound, felt like something. I tossed him the keys. Isabella is 13 now. She figured it out before I told her. I learned this during the conversation I'd spent weeks preparing for, the one where I sat her down and tried to find the right words for a situation that doesn't have them. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Dad, I heard you and Mom arguing about DNA tests. I Googled what that meant. I've known for a while." I stared at her. "How long?" I asked. "A while," she answered. I asked her if she was okay. "I think so," she replied. She asked me one question. Would it matter if I wasn't yours? I looked at my daughter, her mother's eyes, my stubbornness, some combination of both of them that has become entirely her own, and I said, "No, but I'm grateful I don't have to find out." "Yes." He nodded like that settled it. Then she went back to her chopping. Zachary is 5. He is building a Lego spaceship on the kitchen floor this morning, narrating the construction in a continuous stream of plot that involves at least 3 dragons, a space station, and something he calls the Lego police. He doesn't remember Sophia well enough to miss her. The supervised visits, every other weekend, social worker present, are awkward affairs with expensive gifts he doesn't particularly need and promises that float away by Monday. He accepts the gifts and moves on. Kids are pragmatic that way. My mother drives up from San Antonio twice a month. She cried when I told her the full truth, then immediately mobilized. "Those are our grandchildren," she said. "All 3 of them, that's not a discussion." She was right, it wasn't. Work has been good. My boss noticed what he called my renewed focus in the months after the divorce and offered me a project lead position on a highway interchange redesign that'll take 3 years to complete. The irony, that my career absorbed and benefited from the controlled demolition of my personal life, is not lost on me. I let it be ironic. I haven't dated. My therapist, a patient man named Dr. Acaffer, who I see on alternating Thursdays, says that's reasonable. He also says it won't last forever. I'm not sure I believe him yet. Trusting another person with anything significant feels like volunteering your structural integrity to someone who hasn't been tested. But Dr. Acaffer says the math changes. I'm taking his word for it. Sharon Blackwood sent me a text 2 weeks ago. Sophia has filed a motion to modify the custody arrangement. 3 years of documented sobriety. There had been a period in the first year after the trial when things had apparently gotten difficult, and consistent therapy and the argument that rehabilitation has occurred. The hearing is next month. I read the text, set my phone down, poured my coffee, and thought for approximately 30 seconds. Then I picked it up and texted Sharon back, "I'll be there." It never fully ends. That's the thing they don't tell you in the dramatic version of the story, the version where the verdict comes down and the credits roll and justice is delivered in clean, satisfying fashion. It doesn't end. Sophia will always be the mother of my children. The legal system will always offer new motions. Connor will always have Mark Allen's jaw. Zachary will always have questions someday that I won't have complete answers to. But this is the thing I've learned. 3 years removed from a hospital stairwell and a blood type that didn't add up. I don't have to let her chaos become my chaos. This morning, this particular Saturday morning with coffee and bacon and Zachary's, dragon astronauts and Connor's keys on the counter, and Isabella's choppin' drifting down from upstairs. This is mine. Built on honest ground. Built with clear eyes and a full accounting of the load-bearing elements and no hidden cracks in the foundation. It's not the life I planned. It's not the family I thought I was building. But every brick of it is real, and that's not nothing. That's everything. Sophia lost a life she had constructed on deception. Deception always collapses. This is not a moral statement, it's a structural one. The load doesn't care about the story you tell yourself. It only cares about whether the foundation can bear it. Mine can't. I know because I checked. I know because I built it myself the second time with my eyes open. And every morning when Zachary climbs into my lap at the kitchen table and tells me about the Dragon astronauts and their ongoing adventures in the Lego galaxy, I think, we're going to be okay, not perfect, not unscathed, but okay. After everything burns down, okay is the greatest victory you can claim.